All right, guys, so UFC 289 just finished, and I wanted to give my thoughts on some of the fights, but not all of the fights, because to be honest, not all of the fights were that exciting, were they? Now, the first fight that I think we really need to get into was, of course, the main event, Nunes versus Aldana. Let's not shit on it straight away. Let's give Nunes her roses. She definitely deserves them. She's had an amazing career. I actually had some friends over during this fight, and we watched it together. And we started watching the UFC together when she became champion 7 years ago. It was a very nice moment to see her retire. It was awesome to see her get her love from the fans. She put on an absolute clinic. I don't think there is a better time for her to retire. She's got an amazing wife. She has an awesome kid. Her life is together. She'll be able to make a lot of money going forward in her career as a coach for all the young Brazilian fighters, men and women coming up. So good on her for that. I'm happy that she got her moment. The fight was shit. The fight was boring. The whole pay-per-view actually was pretty much a fight night card. It's going to go down as the worst pay-per-view of the year, for sure. Apart from that amazing knockout that we got during the prelims that I'm going to get to, and the awesome co-main event, nothing else really sort of lived up to it. We're going to work down the fights and talk about them, but for a pay-per-view, I feel bad for all the Canadians out there, because that's what they got after such a long break. Disappointing to see. I enjoyed it because I'm a UFC fan and I enjoy everything that the UFC does. But when you rank it amongst the other things that the UFC does, that was, like I said, that's going to be the worst pay-per-view of the year, easily. I don't know what the hell Aldana was thinking when she stepped into that cage. That's her moment to take everything. And if you guys have watched some of my videos in the past, you know that one thing that I like to talk about is the fight in the fighter. I like to see someone that has a bit of fire underneath them and wants to go for it. Coming into tonight's pay-per-view, I was a big fan of Nate the Train, and I'm still a huge fan of Nate the Train because he lost those first two rounds and still fought all the way into the third round and won himself the third round. Aldana, she came in, lost the first round. Her coach told her she needed to strike, lost the second round. Guys, she threw 10 strikes for the entire fight. You're going against the GOAT of the GOATs. One of the greatest female combat athletes on the planet. One of the greatest combat athletes on the planet. You're going against her to take her title. You threw 10 strikes. Pathetic effort. So it was disappointing to see that sort of end to the pay-per-view, especially after the amazing main event that we got. But the flip side to that coin is that even though Aldana put on an absolutely pathetic performance, she just fought for a UFC title, she should be dropped from the UFC, we got to see Amanda Nunes put on an absolute clinic. She pretty much got to show off her striking, her elbows, her ground and pound, her takedown, like she was against a heavy bag for 25 minutes. I think the way that we're going to have to frame this fight going forward, guys, is that Amanda Nunes got to show off all of her skills before she finally hung up her gloves. So good for her, and pathetic from Aldana. Horrible attempt. You should be cut. That's all I have to say, really, about the main event. It was as fun to watch as it was as fun to watch a really high athlete spar for a bit. And if you were paying the full price for a pay-per-view, you got robbed. Moving down the card, let's go to Oliveira versus Dariush. I am so happy and satisfied to see Oliveira win. I like Dariush. Got nothing against him at all, but Oliveira is just such a personality and he's so fun to watch fight. And every fight that he's in, he makes it exciting, and he did that again tonight. There was a time there, all the boys were sitting there, we were watching it. Oliveira's on the bottom, he's going for submissions. One of my mates who's watching it, he loves jiu-jitsu, does jiu-jitsu, and I'm talking to him about how jiu-jitsu on the bottom is not great for MMA anymore inside the cage. And Oliveira is actually showing that and doing a nice heel hook, and Dariush works his way out of it, and then Oliveira has to scramble his way back into the fight because he's chosen to be on bottom for a minute and a half, and he does get himself back into the fight and actually gets the finish. It was an amazing fight to watch. It was that anticipation and that worry of, has Oliveira still got this going into the fight? You know, it's a fight that he's going up against a guy that's won so many fights in a row, and you were the champ. And are we going to see a Tony Ferguson-esque decline, or are we going to see a great comeback story? And then you see him on the bottom for that long to come back and get the finish. It was amazing to watch. And the way that he owned the mic in the post-fight speech with DC, it goes to show the kind of experience that you get once you've been the champion for so long. You know how to work a crowd, you know how to work a mic, you know how to work a moment. And he knew all of that. He knew when his back was against the cage, he knew when he was losing on the cards, and he knew when to put on a show when he was talking on the microphone. It was amazing to see. It was such a fun fight to watch. I really appreciated having Oliveira back, and I love that Oliveira has got another win under his belt. And I think we should run it back between Oliveira and Makhachev. Why not? Why not? You know, all the other guys in the top 5, they're on 1 or 2 fight win streaks, and they've worked their way just sort of playing with each other, and they're busy with each other. They're tied up with each other right now. I think the winner of Connor Chandler should be fighting the winner of the BMF for the BMF title, purely because those guys have had so many shots at the title. They've all had more than one shot at the title. Give Oliveira that same respect. He was a defending champion for so long. Let Oliveira have the next chance at Makhachev. Let Oliveira have the next chance at Makhachev while the rest of them fight over the BMF title. And then maybe we can put on a crazy pay-per-view card. We have the BMF champ versus the lightweight champ. And hopefully, that would be McGregor versus Oliveira. Now that is a pay-per-view. You could grow the UFC's highest selling pay-per-view out of the UFC's lowest selling pay-per-view. You could do that with what happened on this card tonight. So very fun, very interesting to see. That part was highly enjoyable. All right, let's move down the card quickly, guys. Like I said, I'm not going to cover every single fight, but I will cover this one. Mike Malott. Mike Malott, to me, was the MVP of the weekend. He really won the weekend. He won the press conference. He won the fight in very nice fashion. Handled the crowd well, talked to the crowd well. There's not a lot that I really want to say about the fight. You know, it was a fun fight. It was an interesting fight. I liked the choke. And to me, during the entire time, I was just like, good on him. Like, when he was coming out, I was like, man, he's really, you know, he worked really hard during the press conference. During the fight, he stayed cool, he stayed calm, collected, got the finish, worked the crowd afterwards, had his moment. You could see how happy he was. And it just reminded me of all the wins that we got back in Australia when the UFC came to Perth. It was one of those things where, like, you want to see the home team win, even though I'm not from Canada. And it was great to see that and to see him have his moment. So overall, it was just a nice little bit of flavor on the pay-per-view. But it was one of those things where, why is it the feature fight of the pay-per-view? You know, like, why are you placed here on the pay-per-view? You should be at least the opening fight of the pay-per-view. You don't deserve to be here. It's one of those things that it made the pay-per-view a really good fight night, but not a great pay-per-view. Because if you take Oliveira versus Dariush off this pay-per-view, you are left with like, why are you paying $80 for this? This deserves to be on ESPN+. But Mike Malott, he had his moment on the pay-per-view and he worked the crowd, so good for him. It was good to see it. All right, then it was Dan Ige versus Nate the Train Baby in the UFC. Oh, I wanted Nate to win so bad coming into this. And it was one of those losses where you just think, that's okay, you know, that's okay. Again, I want to see the fight in the fighter. I want to see someone who has heart, who has a go. Nate the Train lost the first round, definitely lost the second round. I see there's some people online calling it a robbery. Like, Nate the Train didn't win that first round. Like, he clearly lost the first round. Go back and watch it again. I understand he's a fan favorite. You want him to win. You know, like, I was joking around saying robbery after the fight, but it wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a robbery at all. But in that third round, Nate had been wobbled badly twice, knew he was down on the scorecards, and bit down on his mouth guard and went for it. Really went for it. And he won that third round. And even though he lost the fight, that's okay. It's your 5th fight in the UFC. You're fighting to get into the top 15 and you lost. But you lost swinging. That is, as a fan, that's all you can ask for. As long as you still got that fight in you, go back, train, learn what you need to learn, and then we'll see you again next time. And even if you lose next time, as long as you keep that fire and that grit going, that's all we want to see. And, you know, I hate to circle back to the main event and keep trashing that, but that is what was so frustrating about Aldana. Her coach was yelling at her at the end of the 4th, like, girl, do something. And then she ended up on bottom underneath Nunes the entire time. As long as a fighter has got a bit of grit in them, then you can keep cheering for them forever. I think it's what makes, like, here we are talking about the main event again, but I think that's what makes Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Weili Zhang the most interesting female fight of all time, because those girls were clashing together like rhinos and neither of them wanted to quit. And if you had just seen that out of Aldana tonight, it would have made up for it. Anyway, we're not going to talk about Aldana again. She should be dropped. She should be fired. That's the end of that. Nate the Train, he lost, but I don't think he lost any fans. And if you're going to lose, that's the best way to lose. So well done, Nate the Train, still in the UFC, baby. I'm going to skip the opening of the pay-per-view and go straight to the prelims. Nassourdine Imavov versus Chris Curtis. I wanted Chris Curtis to have a good showing. I really did. And it wasn't his fault the fight got stopped. He's the one that got headbutted and copped the slash to the eye. Why does this keep happening to Chris Curtis? His fights end in a way where you just want to, what are we doing, man? What are we doing? Like, you were begging the ref to give you more time. But if you had just dropped your hand and pretended that you could see through that eye, you wouldn't have needed to beg for more time. You could have gotten back in the cage. Now, I understand as a fan watching that and as someone listening to this, that sounds ridiculous. You're saying like, Doug, the guy can't see. Michael Bisping couldn't see throughout his entire career and faked medical tests so he could keep fighting. If Chris Curtis really wanted to keep fighting, all he had to do was drop his hand and not blink his eye, and they would have restarted the fight straight away. I wanted Chris Curtis to have a good showing. I'm kind of disappointed that yet another fight ends up this way, where he seems defeated and disappointed that the fight has ended the way it has. Like, at a certain point, mate, you got to take the fight into your hands. I think it's because I've been watching his career so closely, and his last 3 fights, he's had these moments where he's just like, why has it turned out this way? Like, dude, yeah, like I hype you up. I want you to be good. Like, be good. Be good. Like, get some savagery in you. You're out there, you're doing the podcast with Strickland. Get some of that savagery in you, and let's get this career moving. I would still back you, and I'm still going to be a fan of you going into your next fight. But you got one chance left, Chris. One chance left. And then you'll lose MMA highlight clips as a fan forever. You don't want that, mate. You don't want that. Okay, last fight that I want to talk about was on the prelims. Zahabi versus Aori. Let's just talk about that knockout. Oh my God, what an amazing knockout. Aori definitely has brain damage. Poor kid. Poor kid. I can't believe, like, it was one of those hits where you hit him so hard. Let's back up. It was one of those hits where you hit him, he hits the ground, and he's sort of rolling on the ground, stunned with his arms up. Now, that is a stunned, knocked out opponent, and I do believe that some people just have that reaction when they're knocked out, especially when they're fighters and they're combat athletes. They're always go, go, go. That he's almost getting back up, but he's getting back up in a daze. And to a judge or a referee, when he sees that happening, obviously in his mind, he wants to let the fighter fight his way out of it. So I do not blame the referee for letting those fights go on. Because if you don't let the referee let that fight go on, you start getting early stoppages. And as a fan and as the entire sport, we don't want a sport full of early stoppages. We want a sport where athletes are allowed to fight their way out of bad scenarios. That's what makes for some of the greatest fights we've ever seen. So the refs, they need to be given that sort of leeway to let a fight go on, especially when a dazed athlete is sort of leaning forward off of his hips, chest forward with both hands out. And that's what Aori was doing. The follow-up punches that came down, that rained down on him, were savage. And the referee got in there straight away and stopped them straight away. So to me, it was good reffing, really good reffing. What I wanted to talk about the most was how sad it was to see. Disappointing is not the right word. It's just sad to see Aori get up and think that he's still in the fight. Think that it's just the end of the round. It's not that the fight's being called off. Because that does mean that that poor fighter has copped some serious damage. So what can we do about that? I think he needs to take off some serious time, take a year off, really do some light sparring, and keep going back to Vegas, to the UFC, to the Performance Institute, and make sure that he is 100% healthy before he gets back in there. And he also needs to start tweaking his fighting style to be a lot safer and a lot smarter. He can't let himself get into brawls. Some fighters can get into brawls throughout their entire career and slowly accumulate damage, but you have definitely now got that damage under your belt. So it's time to just start being very methodical and very careful about how you fight your fights. He's 29, so he's still got a couple of years in the cage, but it's time to really, really be on point about the next couple of years, because from 29 to 33, that is it as it goes for title runs, really. 29 to 33, this is your moment. And you are starting from the position of you were on the prelims and you just got a bad knockout. So if we're going to really make a run of this and we're really going to do something at 29, it's time for on point, thought out, methodical career building. Otherwise, it's time to have a look at it. After a knockout like that, it's really time to have a look at what you're doing. All right, guys, that was UFC 289. What did you think of the fights? Do you think I'm off about any of this? What do you think is next for Beneil Dariush? How do you think we should start putting Charles Oliveira back into the title picture? And what did you think of the main event? Are you a little bit less disappointed than I am about the main event, or are you more disappointed about it? Are you sorry that you wasted 25 minutes watching a girl throw 10 strikes against one of the greatest athletes in the world? Let me know what you think about it down in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed the fight. I'll see you in the next video.